I live at home, and my family and I live in a peaceful, private neighborhood. Or more just a street really, but it's a gated community and we are pretty secluded up on a hill. Now, all you really have to do if you want to get in but don't know the code is wait for someone to go through the gate before you. Some good that does security wise, I know, but it's a very quiet community and everyone knows each other and gets along. So it's usually only the odd curious explorer or lost delivery guy. Oh, and 19-year-old gal here by the way, in case there's curiosity. Now this happened a few weeks ago earlier in the summer. It was just a usual morning with everyone else out at work or otherwise, myself taking advantage of the opportunity to sleep in. By about 10, I was up and I was letting the dogs outside when I heard a knock at the door. We have a glass front door. I decidedly hate those now, and I could see what certainly looked to be a delivery guy at the door, and he could see that I was home so I couldn't avoid answering. Glass doors gotta work both ways, I guess. My mom's always ordering things, so I figured it was something I had to sign for, or the guy would have just left it there and got a walk over and opened the door. More concerned with the fact that I very obviously had just rolled out of bed more than anything else. There in the doorway is a skinny white guy of about 30 with sandyish hair wearing a brown uniform, collared work shirt, and matching brown pants, like UPS. However, I noticed there's no logo on the shirt. In fact, no letters, name, or writing whatsoever anywhere. Which was weird enough. By that point, I've actually focused in on the guy himself, and that's when it got weird. This guy instantly gave me the creeps. What I noticed first were his eyes. He didn't look normal, honestly. His eyes weren't meeting mine, and he took a moment to speak. When he did, I almost wanted to crawl out of my skin. He had this raspy, slow voice, and sounded like he wasn't even paying attention to what he was saying.
I'm here delivering packages,
he said. He looked behind me as he spoke, not at me, through the doorway into the house.
What's your name?
I gave him our last name.
Oh yeah, I think I have a package for you. Is there someone else like your mom or dad where they can sign for this? I mean, if you're alone though, I bet you could too.
He looked hopeful. He didn't even bother to ask how old I was. Also, I believe for UPS, you don't even need to be 18 to sign anyway. And normally, he'd produce a name and check to confirm, if anything. The guy was fishing. Definitely knowing something was off, but about to respond. That's when I noticed the guy didn't have a package. I froze. In fact, he didn't even have a clipboard or paper of any kind. But he did have a fanny pack on his belt. I knew that wasn't very unusual in itself, but I noticed it looked really out of place. It was beige, and didn't go with his uniform at all. In fact, the whole thing looked more like someone just trying to copy a UPS uniform. When he did meet my gaze, he looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Before he could notice me hesitate, I said, "Oh, yeah, my parents are both just asleep. I'll go get one of them to sign. They need to wake up anyway." And that did it. That set something off in the guy's head. That's when he seemed to lose it. He started mumbling incoherently, muttering something like,
I've made a mistake. This is the wrong house.
And stopped making eye contact completely. He was pacing a bit, as if fighting some internal battle over whether or not to stay. He completely dropped the act by now, and we both knew his story was totally unbelievable. He didn't seem to care. He started walking away, and I slammed the door and locked it. Then, feeling a bit safer, I watched through the window as he ran out to the street, where I noticed a large, white, unmarked van. One of the ones with two big doors in the back with no windows on the sides. I wanted to get all the information I could about this guy, so as he books it down the street, I look at the van and get a chill. There's no plates. This was creepy enough, but the worst of it actually came after. I called my dad and told him about the creep. He said to lock all the doors until he got home. Once he did, I gave him a full description, and my dad looked really worried, and I wasn't sure why. I mean, I hadn't been hurt, and the guy was gone, so the threat was over, right? As I said earlier, most of our neighbors are very close family friends. My dad emailed them all a description of what had happened. I went about the day until dinner time came when he told me he had something to tell me. He and my mom hadn't told me before, so as to not freak me out. Apparently, a few months previously, the neighbors directly next to us also had an incident. They have 2 teenage girls, one a few years younger than myself. The youngest one had been home alone one day by the pool when she looked inside and saw someone walking inside their house. Terrified, she had apparently gone around the side of the house into her room and hid, and called either the cops, her parents, or both, not sure of all the details, and waited while she saw this man walking around in the house. There are actually windows in some of the walls in the interior of the house, so she could see from her room into the kitchen and family room and elsewhere. He walked around, opening doors and looking in, but apparently there was money and jewelry laying around that he could have easily taken. That wasn't what he was looking for. She ended up hiding out of sight until she heard the front door close and went out to check if he'd gone. She saw him drive away in the car he left in. It was her mother who had replied to my dad's email. She gave a description of the man who had entered their home. He had been white, wearing a brown uniform, and drove off in a white van. Had I known about it before, I don't know if I'd still have been able to be so calm about the guy talking to me at the door. We filed a report that day. The cop came to our house and seemed convinced it was a would-be robber. I don't think so. Something was up with that guy. He was too socially awkward. He seemed like he didn't know how or didn't care to interact with other people. He looked way too pleased when I answered the door, and when he saw the empty house inside, and he'd walked right past valuables laying out in the open when he'd entered the neighbor's house. And who knows what things could have been in that fanny pack. I truly believe there are some people out there who are just not right. I'm so glad I didn't let him know I was home alone. My sister and I were left home alone for the night because our parents were attending the graduation party of one of my brother's friends. Frankly, I was looking forward to the night of freedom, and I also happened to be closer with my sister than I was with anyone else. After they left, we watched a movie and played some games. I was only about 11 at the time, and she was 15, so my judgment varied from hers greatly. It was around 10 when both of us noticed a flashing of lights on the wall across from us. This shimmering was clearly coming from the front door, which was mostly made up of a window that allowed all light to pass through. She was a bit unsettled, because we lived in a remote area and seldom had visitors. I had no sense of threat since I was too young, and told her I would check it out. When I went to peer out of the front door, I saw a cluster of maybe 3 cars making their way around the loop we had in front of our house. To be clear, this wasn't shared with other houses. In fact, we didn't live in a neighborhood. It was a private drive. And I figured they were probably just lost and turning around as the cars left abruptly. I explained the situation to my sister, and at first, she was worried, but as some time passed, she seemed to shrug it off a bit. We finished watching TV and were beginning to clean up around our house when we heard the knob on the entrance door via the garage being fiddled with. It was a bit faint and could have been an animal, which did happen a lot. I didn't worry too much. But my sister continued to grow skeptical. This struggling with the knob went on for a minute or so, and was accompanied by some jingling, and started to sound like something was being stuck in the keyhole. It subsided, and then was finished with a firm pound on the door as we heard it echo throughout the house. As someone who was still rather ignorant of danger, I became scared, and my sister looked to me as we were in silence. We paused for about 5 seconds out of shock, and before we could make any movements, we heard the door from our basement open and slam shut. Our basement staircase was across the house, and there was no way one single person could have covered the distance in that time. Using a separate staircase, we crept upstairs with haste. Both of us ran to my sister's room, and we hid in her closet. Once in there, we got on the phone with our parents and informed them. They notified the police and informed us to stay put. In her closet, we fumbled through the dark to grab items that we could use to defend ourselves with. She grabbed her snowboard, which had a sharp metal edge on the end, and I could find nothing better than a sturdy hanger. Both of us breathing heavily, we soon noticed something outgrow the sound of our breaths. We heard footsteps resonate and increase in volume as they clearly came closer and closer to her room. Right as the steps came to a stop, we looked at each other in terror because we knew that this person was now in the room. From under the closet, we saw light pierce through the crack as the switch was flicked. The person walked around the room and began moving stuff as we could hear from behind the door. The rummaging stopped, and the footsteps returned. They were distinctly growing much louder, and 2 shadows formed beneath the crack of light under the door, where his feet had prevented light from coming through. The noise I will never forget is when the knob on the closet door began to turn. It was met with a stiff halt as we locked it shut. It was odd. No doors in our house had locks but that one, and thank God it did. He jiggled it a bit, but gave up after a few shakes. His footsteps grew more distant and soon faded. After about 10 minutes, my sister and I started to feel safe as we no longer heard any sounds. She explained to me that the distance from the closet to the window that allowed us on the roof was only about 5 feet. We mustered up the courage and darted for the roof. Once up there, we felt much safer as no one would ever check up there. We waited for about 15 minutes and the cops soon came. They arrived and we got back into the house. It was as if we were returning to a completely different house. Everything had been trashed and ransacked. The aftermath left us with stolen jewelry, a mess in our house, and an experience I'll never forget. We're just lucky the intruder wasn't able to break down the 1-inch wooden barrier that separated us from him. And I can't imagine what he would have done if he did. I was about 14 or 15 years old and living in my parents' mobile home in Southern California. We lived in a quiet beach town where everyone knew each other and nothing ever happened. Anyway, it was a school night about 11 p.m., so I was laying in bed waiting to fall asleep. In those days, I had a loft bed, which looks like a bunk bed except instead of a bottom bunk, there was a desk which had my computer and TV and stuff on it. It was getting close to summer, so I had my window open to let in the cool air. I was just about to fall asleep when my screen fell off my windowsill and crashed onto my bedroom floor. Now, this still isn't a strange occurrence because I would often come home and leave through my bedroom window, so the screen did not fit perfectly in place due to me taking it off so regularly, so it would periodically fall off. But it did startle me and got my blood flowing. So I rolled over in bed and looked up at the ceiling and thought I would just put it back on in the morning. Then the pungent, sickly sweet odor wafted up into my face. I couldn't exactly put my finger on what the smell was, but I thought it was very strange and I should maybe check it out. But slowly, because I was tired and it was most likely a raccoon that had died under the house. It wouldn't be the first time. So I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, sat up in bed, and let my legs hang off of the side. My heart jumped up into my throat as I saw a large tattooed arm reach through my window and feel around on the floor in my bedroom. The guy grabbed the screen and slowly, quietly pulled it out the window. At this point, I was freaked the fuck out, and my adrenaline had kicked in at levels my prepubescent body had never before experienced. My eyes started to water. I stopped breathing, and time stopped. I thought it could have only been some crazy crackhead coming to kill us and steal all our valuables. Seconds ticked by, and I sat there in my bed, not 2 feet above the window the arm just shot through. I thought maybe he will just go away, but of course he didn't, and to my horror, I watched as the man's arm grabbed my window frame once again. Then he pulled himself up slowly, and leg crept through next. It was silent, and had I been asleep, this mountain of a man would have come into my room without a sound, and we never would have known he was there. But I was not asleep. I grabbed the Bowie knife I kept underneath my pillow, because I, just like every other teenage boy, was a badass, and yelled at the top of my lungs, "I have a knife, get the hell out of my room!" And before the guy could completely pull himself up into my room from outside, I scared him. He lost his footing and fell backwards out my window and into a rosemary bushes outside, cussing and spitting. I remember yelling out for my dad and saying something along the lines of, "Dad, somebody's breaking in." And he was at my bedside faster than I could get the words out. He looked out the window, told me to stay there, and jumped out the window after this smelly fucking ogre. He never did find that guy, but police came and looked, and eventually they decided it was a drunk homeless guy who was desperate and looking for a place to sleep and maybe some free food and stuff to pawn. So we locked up the house, fixed my window, and went back to bed a couple hours later. I didn't sleep at all that night. That was an incredibly traumatic experience for me, being that I was essentially the person who had to confront a home invader. But that wasn't the scary part. What's truly horrifying is a couple days later, we found a makeshift home underneath our house with a sleeping bag, water, extra clothes, and a big hatchet. This guy had been living underneath our house for God knows how long, without anybody knowing he was there. I believe he chose to come in through my window, because it was the only room in the house that was open to the outside that you could not see a person sleeping in it unless you were standing in the room. I still think to this day, the dude had planned on robbing us, cased the house, and chose my room as his entry point because he could get in quietly so he wouldn't wake anybody up. He then built his home under our house and waited for his opportunity. Then when I left my window open, he decided to strike. I've had dozens of crazy things happen to me in my life, but that series of events that unfolded was easily one of the most fucked up things that's ever happened to me, and it really opened my eyes to the fact that crazy fucked up things do happen to normal people, and you should always hope for the best, but plan for the worst.